Welcome to the Firehouse Roundtable podcast, brought to you by the Ventura Fire Foundation. My name's Peter McKenzie. I'm one of the hosts. I'm a retired fire captain with the City of Ventura Fire Department.
And I'm Jason Kay. I'm an active fire captain also with the Ventura Fire Department.
And we are excited that you are going to spend some time with us at the kitchen table, learning about firehouse issues that we're trying to bring awareness to.
Thanks for joining us as we discuss the issues of being a firefighter, both on and off duty, and how it affects us.
Let's get right to it. All right, welcome, Jason. Another episode of the Firehouse Roundtable. How you doing?
I'm good. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time, and having this many people on at the same time will be interesting.
Yeah, I think I was having the same feelings. In fact, I'm like, this could get rowdy. This could, we're going to have 3 or 4 firefighters at the same time, and you never know what's going to come out of that. But yeah, looking forward to it. So obviously, we're talking about the Thomas Fire. We got the 5-year anniversary coming up, but I'm excited to get into some of these stories.
Yeah, the rowdier the better. Let's go for it.
All right, let's get started. All right, we'd like to welcome Battalion Chief Doug Miser to the show. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Pete.
Yeah, so we got the Thomas Fire anniversary coming up here shortly, and we wanted to just do kind of a commemoration, remembrance, whatever you want to call it, about the events of that day, and specifically get some input from firefighters who were there, who had an active role in it, and you definitely were one of those. I think you were leading a strike team in the early stages. So let's maybe set the stage for us. What was happening right before the Thomas Fire rolled in? What do you remember? And then how you got the call, what kind of transpired, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Boy, we're going back a ways back here, but essentially we were projected to go into a 4-day Santa Ana event. And I think everybody was pretty much on high alert. We hadn't had any rain kind of leading up to this wind event. It was starting kind of in the late afternoon, and it was going to push through. It ended up being, I believe, 17 days in a row of Santa Anas, which is pretty unprecedented for Southern California. May have even broken a record, but I was off duty. I was heading up to Ojai. I was meeting my girlfriend for dinner. And as I was just kind of making the turn on the 33, pushing towards, as you kind of angle back in and you could see the Santa Paula ridgeline, I could see it glow way out. And I was thinking, I'm like, God, man, that is really big. That's something profound. I kind of looked down at VCAD, which is an app that we have that obviously gives us an opportunity to just see whatever calls that are going. And right as I was pulling it up, I could see it had not been dispatched, but it was getting punched out for the initial brush response. And I remember thinking, going, gosh, if we're just getting the call now and the glow is as heavy as it is right now, this is going to be bad. This is going to be a big fire. So I turned around, got back into the city as fast as I could, and I just drove down to the BC quarters, and I believe Chris McDonald was already working, or perhaps Tony Hill was working, and then Chris McDonald came in, and then Jack was coming in, and then I believe Matt Brock, Chief Brock, was already here in the city at that point. It was a pretty much all hands on deck moment. I went to the house, grabbed one of the reserve BC vehicles, and started to kind of just listen to as everything started to unfold in the Santa Paula area, and listening to it moving out. It was pretty apparent that this was going to be hitting Ventura in a pretty quick fashion.
So one of the things I'll comment on real quick, Doug, those days where the Santa Anas are blowing the way they were that day, everybody's always on heightened alert. So I'm sure you were thinking, if we get something today, this is going to be the real deal. It's going to be a huge event, which is why as soon as you saw that getting punched out and as soon as you saw the glow, you knew this one's going to be major. So maybe get into when you were assigned to be a strike team leader, where you headed and what you were thinking from that point.
Yeah, so I was essentially covering the city because I was the only BC that was available, and I was heading in. You could tell the smoke started to spread pretty fast throughout the city. And it, one of the interesting things, I think most people think of Santa Anas that are blowing, if you're going to have a smoke column, it's going to be basically pushing towards the ocean. But in reality, one of the elements that was real unique to this, and I wouldn't say super unique, but definitely was a little bit more of a kind of a east to north push. And so the way that the fire was pushing was basically going to just rip all the way across all the mountain range that basically parallels the coastline and also the city of Ventura, which is obviously going towards the ocean eventually, but not pushing towards Oxnard, if you will. So I was driving in the Ventura Heights area, getting in kind of a picture, and the very first spot fires started to show up crossing the Santa Paula Ridgeline, moving into East Ventura. And I believe that strike teams were starting to assemble and at least move towards the Londo Clear Point area. And as I was going through we had lost power. There was not an activation, like a reverse 911 call yet. This was all pretty early in the first couple of hours of this. I think the sheriff's department, which generally coordinates with PD, we were starting to move more towards, let's just start evacuations via the old style method of just going over the PA systems and vehicles and moving people out. And I was in that area, and I immediately get dispatched to a spot fire. And to kind of put this into perspective, the fact that the fire had not really even reached the Ondolondo area yet, and we had a spot fire at Grant Park, which is on the west side of the city entirely. Again, it gives you an idea of how fast this was spotting across the backside of our mountain range here. And so as I ended up getting, I believe, 5 engines initially on that dispatch. We had almost, I believe that the initial dispatch plus the upgraded second alarm response had pulled about 20 of the 52 engines in the county of Ventura altogether, tied in with the initial attack, which spread most of the initial resources across the Santa Paula area, and then started to readjust as the fire started to move west. We were moving quickly into the Grant Park area and getting an idea and a scope of how fast and how far this was going to push. And initially we pulled up, and our initial kind of on scene was approximately 20 acres currently active in that entire area.
Gotcha. At what point did you guys go, okay, we're a little bit overwhelmed here. We're not going to be able to, we're not putting this spot fire out and the whole problem goes away. Like, at what point did you make that assessment, and kind of what was your thought process and how that played out?
Yeah, it was almost immediate. We basically pushed straight into a structure protection dash, getting an idea, especially with Grant Park, the way that the roads are located up and around City Hall and moving back to the backside of the avenue, even having a full concept of how much fire we had and what the scope and the range of that fire and start was a little bit challenging. But initially we had fire backing down onto a row of apartments that was, basically off of Cedar. And as that fire was kind of pushing back in there, I had Medic Engine 1. I had probably 3 Ventura City apparatus and then a couple Ventura County, and then started to fill in with a couple Oxnard City engine companies. And we were able to at least get an idea of what our primary objectives were going to be, to contain and control the fire as much as we can as it pushed into several different apartment complexes back on Cedar. And then I drove immediately around to City Hall to just kind of get an idea of what kind of fire. It was essentially everything that on the avenue side was more of a backing fire than that of working with a fire front. So we had a little bit of advantage of a little bit of time, whereas on the other side, and listening to what was happening in the Clear Point and Ondolondo area, where it was a full fire front with 60 knot gusts that were pushing through. So we comparatively had a little bit more manageable on our side. And we were lucky that we were able to establish hose lines and create an area for an evacuation route and try to actively hold portions of that, which were threatening structures immediately off that Grant Park footprint.
One of the things I remember about your strike team in particular was that you guys were up above at Grant Park and you could actually see some of those huge structures burning. And what a scene, and what a kind of horrific night to think. I remember thinking Ventura has always been so lucky because of how it's laid out, and it's never going to burn the way that some of those other cities had burned. And here we were looking down at all of these giant apartment buildings and houses, and it was just unbelievable. I know you had a vision of or a view of the Hawaiian Gardens, some of those other big ones.
Yeah, and because of where we were located and how early comparatively we were, I think this is probably right around 11 p.m. and where the fire established, we had yet to even really branch this out as far as a larger kind of scope and alignment for concurrent ICS build out. I had a Ventura County, I believe, battalion chief that was assigned the division in that area. And I believe, I can't even really remember what the name of the division was, but as that was starting to get established and then I was requesting more resources, we were able to kind of get somewhat of a picture of that we were going to be able to hold the Avenue area fairly well. And I think we were going to be in a pretty good situation. We didn't lose any structures in that area. Then there was the worries of it moving back onto the hillside communities that parallel the Ventura Avenue area. And another reported structure fire came in up at the hospital at Vista Del Mar, and that was sounding like it was moving pretty fast. And obviously we were broken out onto so many different frequencies that I didn't get a chance to listen to that much of that particular side of the fire, but it was quite obvious that they were going to be losing the Vista Del Mar. We tried to put together a group of probably 3 engines to go help out in the hillside community, which we were actively losing homes right above the hospital. As we reassembled and came across, that's where we basically ran into Hawaiian Gardens and could kind of see along Church Street and moving into that particular portion of the neighborhood that also goes up Calorama. You could see where the fire was completely unchecked by any. I mean, we just didn't have any apparatus. Everybody was established there. We took 3 engines and went up off of Grove and had we're trying to engage on different structures, and you would find 3 or 4 houses, and then one building burning completely unchecked. And we would go up with a deck gun, try to darken that down, try to remove as much of the active fire in one active structure fire in order to not blow out the windows of the adjacent house. But at that point, we were starting to get more and more out of county strike teams. And they were starting to build a defensive crew that was being established in Hobson Heights and also that of Ventura Heights. So yeah, watching some of the major structures that you had seen that were iconic, such as the Hawaiian Gardens, was breathtaking. You're and shocking, and knowing that there's absolutely nothing anybody could do.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you guys were there, and I remember calling in and saying, "Put me to work. Let's go. Let's get everything." And I think the answer was every single unit that we have is already out and working and staffed. And there were still areas, like you said, that we just didn't have anybody to go there. When there's that much burning, there's just no way you can have it all unchecked. But I know your strike team did a good job, and you were there for a long time and led them down them down that road of where to go and what to do from kind of the avenue side mostly and up top.
Yeah. And then as it moved back up towards the upper portion of the avenue into the different communities that were moving in there, it went from, late at night into the early morning and then progressed all the way through the next day. And it just, it kept moving. And you realize quickly, like this is going to be a week upon week effort.
Doug, I got a question for you. Give our listeners an idea of like, what did you ask your crews to do from the start of it till when they were like, okay, guys, you can go back to station, take a break. Like, what did that look like? Because I know that our guys did some pretty extraordinary shifts and lengths of time that we asked them to stay at, peak performance. But give our listeners an idea of what we were asking of them.
Well, essentially to manage chaos to a certain extent. Our initial, goal is obviously to evacuate as many people out of there as possible. We, address the life threat, number one. And the life threat was specifically making sure that people weren't trying to hold into their houses or apartment buildings, especially with the lack of equipment and resources that we had in the first initial response and what we were going to be faced with. It was removing as many people from the area as possible, getting them off of the major travel routes, and working with PD on getting that done. And secondly, is identifying areas that were going to be in the initial fire impingement onto structures, and identifying and prioritizing and getting an idea of, is this something that we can prep and go? Is this something that we are going to lock in and try to make a stand on? Not putting any of our crews in a position where we have extended hose lays and complicated portions that would box us in, not allowing our crews to be able to cut and run if we were started becoming overrun by fire. So those were, obviously, as a commander on that initial front, those are basically establishing a leader's intent and saying this is where we're at. And then for myself, what I tried to do is be on the move almost all the time and looking and trying to look at where we're going to be in the next 1 hour, where we're going to be in the next 3 hours, where we're going to be in the next 12-hour period. And requesting additional resources was futile. In fact, initially, I believe I had 10 or 12 engine companies associated with my division, which was essentially from City Hall up to Ojai. And then those got quickly pulled. And so with the crews that we did have, it was trying to keep an idea of where the fire was going to go and what were our immediate threats, and take specific areas that you think are going to have pretty darn good resistance to fire, such as like City Hall. City Hall burned all the way around there, and in taking a look at it, as long as the fire wasn't going to get established in any of the tree lines that were immediately adjacent, we were just hoping that it was hardened well enough that we weren't going to have some sort of ember cast that was going to be put into areas where it would get a structure moving, going in fire, and that we wouldn't have to put too much equipment in any one particular area.
Gotcha. Doug, it sounds like it was quite the night, that's a career fire for sure for everybody. But yeah, thanks for coming on and sharing your insight and kind of what you were thinking and giving the listeners kind of a bird's eye view into the conversations and thoughts that they don't normally get, as far as the citizens and the people who, see what's going on, but don't understand the inner workings of the fire service. But much appreciated. Thanks for coming on. No,
definitely. In talking real quick about one of Jason's earlier questions was, I believe, spent 36 hours, and I don't think one person got any sleep during that period of time. And then getting tied back in with operations, which was Matt from our department. One of the unique factors that I think the Ventura City fire crews had to adjust to or kind of get their head around was that after the initial attack, or the IA portion of this fire, and we started getting resources throughout California and established, structured defense groups and so forth. One of the elements that we had is we had to kind of break at least a portion of our department back into backfilling our own stations and also protecting the same residents that we would have for any other type of incident, such as a structure fire or a medical response or ocean rescue or any of the other items that we normally do day in, day out, outside of a large brush fire that's going through our own backyard, is getting crews back into stations, getting them rested, getting them rotated out, and being responsible for the same city that we are always responsible for. It was a difficult mindset for a lot of the crews to see a fire and not being fully engaged in their own backyard when we also knew that the very unique elements of some of Ventura's most tricky areas of firefighting or responding on just regular calls would be best served by that of our own department. So that was kind of a hard mindset for people to get around.
Yeah, for sure. Great insight. I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on.
You got it. Hey, thank you guys very much for having me. And I hope that you have a good rest of your podcast.
Thanks, Chief.
Hey, this is Joe Booth from the Ventura Fire Foundation. To learn more about the foundation and our programs, visit our website at www.venturafirefoundation.org. 100% of our funding comes from generous donors. And if you like what we're doing, I encourage you to become a donor. It's very easy. Just go to our website, again that's venturafirefoundation.org, and click the red donate button at the top. Whether it's $5 or $5,000, every donation helps ensure local firefighters thrive.
All right, welcome back. We are excited about this Thomas Fire anniversary show that we're doing, and we have some new firefighters with us. So I wanted to just take a second to introduce. We have retired Fire Captain Chris Plessner, Fire Captain Mark Neilsen, and also Fire Captain Luke Mitchell. And obviously Jason and I are still here, but we're going to do it a little bit different on this go around. We have all three guys on the show right now. We're going to kind of do a little bit of a round table. Hopefully we can get through it without talking over each other. But guys, welcome to the show. Why don't you each take a minute and kind of introduce yourselves, and then once we're done with that, we'll get right into what we're here to talk about.
All right. Hey guys, I'm retired Fire Captain Chris Plessner. Nice to see all my buddies again. Miss you guys.
Okay, awesome. And then Mark, how about you? Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I was actually hired with Captain Luke Mitchell as well. So we were rookies together, and coming up almost on 15 years here come February. And I live in the city here in Ventura with my wife and my two kids that are second and third grade.
Awesome. Welcome. And then Luke, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Luke Mitchell, born and raised here in Ventura. Like Mark mentioned, we lifeguarded together way back in the day. That's why I first got the fire department bug, was through Trevor Towner. Mark and I worked for Ryan Towner, Trevor's younger brother. So that's how the seed kind of got planted for me. But anyhow, went through the academy with Mark, been here almost 15 years. I have a beautiful wife, Katie, and three kids, Dane, Eli, and Finley. And we are a busy little family these days, let me tell you.
Yeah, I bet it's never easy when you have a few kids at home and they're all kind of that younger age. Plessner, I know you got kids too. Give them a shout out.
Yeah, I got 4 kids. Five now. I got 4 girls, and I have a boy on the way due March 26th. I feel like my introduction sucked compared to these guys, but I got hired the year before Mark and Luke, and I retired in 2020 to work for a kind of family business out in Wisconsin, and miss you guys.
So I know you guys are all were all on duty in different capacities during the Thomas Fire. A couple of you guys were on duty on an engine, and then I came in day 2, and I think Luke and I were chomping at the bit to get back to work to do whatever help we could for the citizens of Ventura. I personally was at home, and as soon as I saw the winds blowing, the hairs on the back of your neck go up, and we all think to ourselves, man, if a fire starts tonight, this is going to be scary, and this is going to be a big one. I remember seeing the probability of ignition at 100%. And I think that may be either the only time or one of the only times where I've ever seen that. When you're looking at fire reports, that means every single ember creates its own spot fire, 100% of them. That number is crazy. And that's because of the level of the Santa Ana winds that night. So I personally called in when I heard the Thomas Fire start. Every single engine was already out working, so they didn't have a place for me. I came in early to work the next morning, and we created a crew and kind of found an old apparatus to staff just so we could do whatever we could. And I remember driving in, seeing homes burn in the early morning light, still just burn to the ground, these giant homes up on the hill. And man, I've never thought that would happen in my experience. Luke, why don't you go into where you were when this all happened and your experience?
Yeah, so I was off duty that evening, and I think I was like giving my son a bath or something. I obviously knew the wind was blowing and knew, there was some potential, but didn't really know what was going on. I'm sure my phone rang a couple times. I just ignored it, helping my wife take care of the kids. So anyway, I finally got back to my phone and, had a bunch of text messages, had a bunch of missed calls. And at that point I called in and tried to find a place to come in and go to work. And, like you said, Jason, that they had already staffed all the engines that they could staff. And they basically said, just rest up tonight because tomorrow I'm sure, they're going to put you to work. So that's basically where I was that evening.
Luke, let's get right into your story because you're not that we don't all have good stories, but your story is a little unique, and I think it speaks to kind of who you are, who our firefighters are. But so you called in. They said, "Yeah, sorry, there's nothing for you. Just kind of get rested." But did you stop there, or did you then do something else and make yourself useful, or where did that go?
Yeah, in the fire service, we have a term called freelancing, and typically it's a bad thing, but I think in this case we did some really good and we saved quite a few homes. So yeah, basically what happened was I went straight to station 1. I picked up my gear, including my radio, and my uncle, he lives out on Foothill just past Wells near Rancho Vista Lane. And he was one of the missed calls from previous where I was helping my wife with the kids and everything. And he said, "Hey, come out here. This thing looks like it's coming straight at us." So anyhow, I went out there, and my uncle has a couple acres. It's all avocado, and a bunch of his neighbors have avocado trees and stuff like that. And his next door neighbor is Todd Barbosa. He's a doctor here in town. And I get out there, and Todd had already organized a fairly sophisticated volunteer fire department in the matter of an hour or two. They called themselves the Rancho Vista Volunteer Fire Brigade. And anyhow, I get out there, and it's all these guys that are pretty well-to-do, and they're pretty smart guys and everything. And they're asking me like, "Hey, like, what do you think?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. It's not good. Like, the winds are blowing, harder and stronger than I've really ever seen before, and we're pretty much in the way. So we need to have a good plan to get everybody out of here safe and make sure all your families are out of here safe and all your pets are out of here safe and all that stuff." And by the time I had gotten there, they had already, they were already ahead of me. They're like, "Yep, we got all the kids, all the wives, all the dogs, everybody's out. Now what do you think?" I'm like, "Well, the good thing is there's a lemon orchard to the east of us, so the fire is not going to directly impact us via the lemon orchard, but the risk to this area was basically a flanking fire. It was in an area that wasn't going to be like in the direct path of the fire, but it was going to be flanked by the fire. So I felt okay with, staying there and helping these guys kind of come up with a safe plan to help mitigate what was going on. So fast forward, I don't know, an hour or so, we went up to the top of the ridge behind the house, and the fire was probably a mile away. It had already passed us, and sure, it was coming towards us, but it was flanking towards us. It wasn't coming straight at us. So at that point, I started getting calls from my parents and some of my neighbors in Ventura saying like, hey, you need to get over here because it's not looking good here and there's no fire engines anywhere. So at that point, I left the Rancho Vista volunteer fire brigade to themselves. They had pumps and they had hose. Somehow they had all this stuff beforehand. I mean, they were ready for a fire. They were prepared. They had done all the brush clearance. They were perfect, I guess, residents of a interface area. So anyway, then I get back to Ventura, and Ventura looks not good. Driving up the street, the fire had already blown through like right above Foothill Road. My parents live on Palomares Avenue, which is straight up from the YMCA. They live up near the top towards Foothill. Well, the fire had already blown through there. So once again, it was more of like a flanking fire at this time. But what had happened was the fire got really established in the Barlow Barranca, which was it's just to the east of Court Street. And then west of, what's that street, Mark? Do you know the name of that other street?
Yeah, up there, that would be Hamilton up there.
Hamilton. So the fire got in there, and it's all eucalyptus, and these trees are, I don't know, 100 feet tall. And obviously the wind was blowing straight to the west, and my parents' house and all the surrounding houses were straight to the west of where this fire was getting well established in this barranca. So what had happened was the ember cast into my parents' street was very severe. And once again, like most people had left, I think the remaining people were me, my mom and dad, my brother. I think my brother was there. Like 2 or 3 neighbors were still around. Everyone else had left. And first thing that happened was 2 houses up on the other side of the street, a fence caught on fire. So I ran over there, used the garden hose, put that fence out, in like its incipient stage so it didn't get any bigger. And then when I was doing that, I heard my mom start yelling, and the house next door to us, a lavender plant of all things, had caught on fire, and it was catching the house on fire. So my mom runs back and puts that fire out. And then someone else starts yelling behind my parents' house, the house behind my parents' house. It's all overgrown, and that started catching fire. So somebody ran over there and put that out. And this went on for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours of putting out these little spot fires. There was a deck at one point where the deck was on fire, and we put that out. And there was no fire apparatus anywhere. I never saw one in that area the whole night. Obviously, the system was extremely overwhelmed. And, it's one of those things, like we always tell like the citizens, like, hey, you need to leave. Like, but if everybody left that night, we would have lost another, I don't know, 10 or 15 homes. And those homes may have caused other homes to go up in flames. And then those homes it could have snowballed. So who knows how many homes we actually saved that night, but
yeah. So I'll go out on a limb for you, Luke, here. That story is amazing. I mean, the fact that you didn't just say, oh, I can't come in. Okay, I'm just going to go back to bed and do whatever. You went and got your stuff. You organized some ranchers basically on the east end of town. Then you went over to your parents' house. You probably single-handedly assisted them with saving, like you said, 10, 15, whatever the number was. That's huge. And that's a testament to who you are as an individual. But in addition to that, who we are as firefighters. Like, we're not just going to sit there and let a bunch of bad stuff happen if there's something you can do about it. And I think in most circumstances, when you talk about freelancing, that would have been frowned upon. But I think in these circumstances where there was no one available, I mean, big props to you for that. I think you're Yeah, your story is amazing because it's not your typical story here. Like, nothing against the other guys' stories or our stories of being on the fire engine, but you were like, no, I'm gonna improvise, I'm gonna adapt, I'm gonna overcome, and we're gonna do some good here. So
Yeah,
big props to you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing I'd like to say just about that quick story is, at all times, like in my mind, I'm thinking escape routes, safety zones, lookouts. Like, I guess like you could say, oh man, maybe that was reckless or whatever. Like there was never a time where anybody I was with was in any danger whatsoever. We had great escape routes. We had, a safety zone. We could drive down to the college or the beach or whatever. We could easily get away. The vehicles were backed in and ready to leave if we had to, and all that stuff. So I don't want to like encourage people to stay when there's a fire, because most of the time that's not the right thing to do.
I will say, as a 10-year firefighter at the time, Luke, you're a professional firefighter and you were able to recognize those situations as opposed to the general public when we ask them to evacuate. They need to leave. This was, like Peter referenced before, probably will be the biggest fire in our careers, everybody who's on here today. So I'm with Peter. You did the right thing. We always put life over property. And as a professional firefighter, I'm sure you're able to recognize all that stuff who does train in this type of thing. I have a couple clarifying questions. What time did you go to your uncle's? Give me like maybe a general time frame. And then what time did you get into Ventura?
Man, it's hard to say. I want to say 7:30, 8 o'clock that evening. I went out to my uncle's and I was there for, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hours. And that's when I started getting calls about, hey, you need to come back here. So back in Ventura, probably around like 10:30, 11 ish. And then after, I guess there's a little bit more to the story. After that initial like Embercast storm from the Barlow Barranca was over and the threat was over to Ventura, or to like that specific area, I started getting calls back from my uncle. So I went back to the ranch, and that was probably at like 4 a.m. And we cut line. The fire had got into the avocado orchard and we cut a bunch of line, and I think they lost like 20 trees or something like that, but we were able to cut line through the duff basically. Then I was at work for 6 days.
Yeah. So for our listeners, just keep in mind, Luke never even talked about the fact that he was up, literally all night cutting line, which is super hard work. And then he started a 6-day shift. He didn't even mention that part. So yeah, Luke, that's impressive and nice work. One of the things that really sticks out to me is when you said that the decorative shrubs, the lavender, caught fire. And that is not something that you usually worry about around your house to catch the house on fire. When that stuff's catching fire, that just tells you what the relative humidity is and the winds are doing around that area. So nice work.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, Chris, let's get to your story. What were you doing during the Thomas Fire?
I was at Fire Station 1 with Logan Hughes and Ryan Howard. We were working that day. And we had heard the fire go out, earlier in the evening. I don't know what time it was, like around 6 maybe. And then we were just, we were at Fire Station 1 running our normal calls. The power had gone out for the area. So we started running a bunch of public assist calls. One of which was we went down to apartment complex down the avenue towards the CMH clinic. There was some apartments down there. And their roll-up gates were, people couldn't get out of the apartment complex because the parking structure was there. And so we threw a ladder and unlatched the gate, and I ended up falling off the ladder and cutting my hand, and we were kind of laughing about it. And that was like at probably 11 p.m. And of course, Logan and Ryan were just howling and laughing. And so we're driving back up the avenue, and I get prompted by dispatch to on our way after we cleared that call, because they had been getting reports that fire was starting to kind of crest over like near the cross, up the gun range and all that stuff. So we could see the glow, and we went up Cedar to Faro, and we went up around Faro, around those big eucalyptus trees around the corner, and you go up towards the cross, and it was just blowing. I mean, it was about to crest over the right there. So we went up Faro. We ended up calling in. I still have I took a picture of the screen because it was kind of iconic for, at least for me, like medic engine 1 has eyes on the fire that's cresting, it's about to crest, requesting a full brush response, which I still look back at it now. It's kind of cool. But we go up there and we start backing in. And one of the funny things was like, my fireman was like, he's like, Plaz, it's not worth it. And it's like, yeah, no kidding, dude. We're not driving. I'm not going to drive through the flames up to the cross. Like, so I'm like, we're just going to back up. And, and so to this day, I still go, Plaz, not worth it. Not worth it, man. Hey, man, it's not worth it. And it's like, yeah, no, gosh, I want to curse. So we're just backing up and then, getting into a position to go back down Cedar. And then, from there, I don't know at what point, but kind of like Luke was talking about, I don't want to say it was freelancing because I think Luke did what he was trained to do. And I guess I wouldn't call this freelancing because everybody knew this fire was huge and people wanted to come in. It was funny. My other fireman who took the day off was at home, and we joked that he was playing World of Warcraft or some video game because he was like, he took the day off. And we worked with Ryan Howard that day, and Jarrett was like at home, and he was like begging to come back in. Everybody wanted to be on that fire, and we ended up picking up Hermes Carbajal off one of the side streets off the avenue. It was just bizarre. We see Hermes in that area, and we're like, "What the hell's going on here?" And he just walks up to our engine with all his gear and just gets on, leaves his truck out in front of somebody's house, and I'm like, "Well, okay, fair enough. We could use the extra hand." We're 3-0 staffing, and now we got 4. I'm like, this is awesome. This is the way it should be. But it was just kind of bizarre. But we ended up coming down, staying on Cedar for a little while as it crested. There's a couple houses right there, which turned out to be one of our firemen's friends' houses. But before everybody got there, we kind of, we were in a safe position. We were on Cedar, and there was houses in between us and the fire. We ended up hooking up to the hydrant momentarily because the fire was coming south towards these houses. And then there was a bunch of big oak trees that if they had caught, they would have burned this whole row of houses down. And we deck gunned the hell out of the side of that hill real quick, just to knock it down, and ended up saving, I think, those 3 or 4 houses, which was kind of neat because probably a month later while we were at it was like a Saturday, they were doing something at not St. Vincent de Paul, but down on the avenue. It was at Catholic Charities. We ended up meeting a lady whose house we ended up saving that night, and it was kind of cool. We took a picture with her and stuff like that. So that was a neat thing to do. It's like a lot of these fires, you're going up north or you're going into a river bottom, but to actually put your training into and making those decisions where sometimes you're not supposed to hook up to the hydrant if you're in a certain position, but we made the decision to do it to save those row of houses. But that's where we were the initial few hours. And we like Doug talked about, we ended up going around to City Hall and those streets adjacent to there, putting out little bush fires, and then putting up some fires as they're coming down towards these houses. And then I ended up meeting up with Mark Neilsen. I don't know, what time was that, Mark? In Midtown, where we were just kind of all over the place a little bit. And
yeah, I mean, it's funny hearing these stories.
Yeah, it must have been like 6 a.m, right? Like it was a long time later after.
Well, I do remember it. I mean, I'll go into it when I kind of share my kind of thing, but all these things, it's flooding all these different memories of, I hear Luke's story and Doug's story and your story, and all these things are intertwined. It's really interesting because, I actually, I came in and we tied in together, and I worked that whole avenue hillside with you. And then we bumped over my engine, your engine, and I think another engine. We went with Doug above the hospital later, which I want to say it was probably 4 or 5 in the morning, because I remember being there when it was dark, and then the sun came up and we were above the hospital there. But yeah, this is wild.
I'll say that Plessner, 2 things that come to mind when Howard was looking at you and saying, Plez, it's not worth it. I could see his outstretched arms, even from the back of the engine, just trying to give you a hug and just make sure that you're okay. And his brothers are all feeling love from him right now. So that's number 1. And then number 2, one of the things you learn when you go to classes about brush fires, don't hook up to a hydrant, don't use a deck gun. And I've heard from multiple sources that you saved those houses because you did that. So that's one where the individual thinking of a fire captain is important to go, I'm going to go off book here and I'm going to do my own thing because this is unprecedented. And I'm going to use the tools I have to do the best good. So nice job.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, well, we could either do this or we can watch these houses burn. And it was like, aren't we here to save life and property? So it was one of those decisions. I mean, it's not for every situation, but it was certainly for that situation, I think.
Yeah, I want to jump in here for a second, Chris. And something you said kind of resonated with me is when we go out of town on these campaign fires up north or in the Inland Empire or wherever they are, and you're there and you get assigned to protect houses or whatever the assignments are, there's like a wall in between you and these houses or the people living in the houses. Like, I don't know them. I don't know these streets. I have zero connection to this place that I'm in. It's not that we don't do the same good job that we do, because everybody does, but it's different when it's in your backyard. So like, we're not having anniversary fires for some out of town campaign fire that you had, in 2018. Like, not that nobody cares, but it's not relevant to us. Whereas we're here 5 years later talking about the Thomas Fire and the connection and all these stories because it was in our backyard. And this fire was personal. Like, Luke, you went from your uncle's house to your dad's house. I have, I live in Ventura. Pretty much everybody here, not everybody, Mark and Luke and me, and live in Ventura. And it matters. And the fact that you get to go talk to people that you impacted yourself with your actions that night, that's huge. Like, we don't normally get that kind of closed loop with a lot of these big brush fires that we go to. And I just think that was awesome. That was cool. Like, it's as tragic as the fire was, it also, brought Ventura together. I mean, how long after the fire was it brought the community together. So I'm kind of rambling now. I don't know where I was going with that, but other than the fact that it was personal, and it's nice to hear the direct results of your guys' action that night on houses that were saved, neighborhoods that were saved. It
looks like Neilsen got to wherever he's going. So he's, getting out of his car now, so we better let him have a turn. Are you hiding from your kids in your garage in your car so you have some silence?
No, you know what? To be honest, I'm sitting in the car because it was the only quiet place in the house because my kids have been homesick all week from school. So this was like the best place to record. It's a little off color, I guess, but hey, it's working.
No, I like it.
Yeah. Let's get into your story, Mark.
I, like Luke, I was off duty that night. I was at home, kind of just finished the evening routine with 2 young kids, with my wife. I remember sitting down on the couch and kind of turning the TV on, and then the phone started ringing. Hey, we need people to come in and backfill because we, as a city fire department, had essentially sent all of our resources out to Santa Paula, more or less. And they were looking for backfill for the city, which is not like uncommon when we have large incidents in and around the city of Ventura. So I kind of looked over at my wife. I'm like, hey, they're looking for people to come in. I work tomorrow anyway. I might as well just go in tonight since I'm headed into work tomorrow morning. She's like, all right, yeah, cool. So I went into work, grabbed my stuff. I went to Station 2 to get on like one of the reserve backup engines. And I remember checking in with Chief Chris McDonald, and he was like, hey, all right. He goes, let me know once you get the rest of your crew at the station and you can put your engine in service. But he goes, start listening to the radio now. He goes, this thing is moving fast and it's coming to Ventura quick. And I was like, okay. And again, like, it was obviously like everyone's talked about. It was windy. Like, all the conditions were prime, more or less, for this thing to just really rip through the whole county. And so what I remember really vividly too was like turning on the radio, getting my crew in service, and listening to how quickly the progress was from Santa Paula towards Ventura. And it was like, okay, it jumped Adams Canyon, which is, out there like west of Santa Paula, but in between Ventura and Santa Paula. It jumped Adams Canyon. It jumped Wheeler Canyon. It jumped Aliso Canyon. And like, I do a lot of like road biking and other things. And so I'm familiar with these areas. And I started hearing how quickly that progress was occurring. And I was like, whoa, man, this thing is really coming a lot faster than anything really that we've seen around here. And so when Chris, you talked about kind of that on scene that you gave, I remember because I went down, I took my engine down seaward to the freeway right there at the 101, because that gave me a good, I didn't really have a specific area to cover. Like you were talking, we weren't freelancing, but we had an empty city more or less. And so we were just trying to kind of spread out to be able to cover whatever we could. And I remember going down there because I could get back far enough from the hillside where I could get a good vantage point. And I remember seeing like the glow in the backcountry and then obviously getting brighter, and then hearing Chris on the radio basically saying, okay, you know, I have eyes on the fire. It's here. And I remember seeing those eucalyptus trees starting to light up and glow from like the fire activity around there, and you requesting a full response. And it was like, well, I'm probably your next closest engine or two, and just started heading your way and kind of tying in with there. And so, and then we, we did all kinds of stuff in and around the avenue. We were really fortunate, I thought, that night, I don't know if you remember, Chris, we had a Ventura County rig join up with us along with an Oxnard rig, and then your engine, my engine, which again, I was super fortunate. Like Chris, I had Thor Molman and Jan Hargett, who are both engineers and were on my rig, in addition to Matt Clapsaddle. So I had 4 guys on my rig as well, and essentially 2 engineers, and one of them just worked as a fireman. And Jan Hargett was my engineer at the time for that night. And so I felt really lucky that having that extra manpower made a huge difference, because we tied in with this county rig, and the guy was a firing boss. And so after Chris kind of anchored that corner behind that apartment complex, it was like, hey, he brought it up. He was kind of like, I think we should fire out this hillside. And I was like, that's probably a pretty good idea. Avenue hillside is so steep. The wind was sort of ripping over the top, but then wasn't really ripping down against the houses and the apartments further down the hill. So the idea was to more or less kind of fire out some of the areas in and around the apartments and kind of burn it uphill a little bit at a time and controlled, so that there really was no fuel to burn up against the structures. So we did that with them for hours, slowly just biting off a little bit at a time and working basically from where Chris had kind of stopped the fire in that corner and just worked northward from there. And then again, it's interesting. Like I said, all these stories kind of intertwine. I don't want to like relive the same story from my perspective, but just like Doug said, what I remember specifically too was, Chris, when we drove over to help over above, because we kind of, once we fired out that hillside and we got to a point where we could probably break away and leave just a couple engines there and take a few engines and go over above the hospital, Chief Miser was kind of like, hey, they could use more help over there than what we need to do here. So he took a few engines, mine and Chris, and I can't remember the third, but what I remember being really, really weird was driving through the city along Poli, turning, like at Seaward there and going across Foothill. And it was like a war zone in my like town here, where houses were on fire everywhere. There's engines just basically just scrapping with whatever resources we had or more or less lack thereof, because there was just so much work. And we bumped up to the hospital, worked up there until basically dawn, and then bumped back over to the Avenue area and kind of worked north towards Ojai that whole next day. I remember, a lot of houses up in some of the unincorporated area north of the city. We have fire bumping right up against it and burning fences and that kind of a thing, and putting those out and kind of systematically just kind of working forward. And I remember working all the way up until the next night. We made it as far north as Casita Springs, which is a little small town just north of Ventura. And fire was the same thing, coming over the hill, starting to back down. We prepped this whole area. And I don't remember what time it was at night. It was definitely night. And I remember you just worked. There was no one to come and help you. We just did whatever we could. And they finally started getting some resources into Ventura County from out of the area to be able to provide some relief. So at some point that next night, they basically said, okay, hey, you guys are going to take a break. We went back to the fairgrounds, and that was our first break. And I don't know the exact timing of it, but it was definitely well over 24 hours into it since when I came in the night before.
Wow, Mark, what a story. Just continuing on with your story, I talked to an engineer a few days later who was on the fire, the Thomas fire, that same time frame as you. And he said he was in line because their engine had been used so much, they were almost completely out of fuel in the engine. He's in line to get fuel behind 5 or 6 other fire engines. And he had to pull the air brake every time he stopped, because every time they would stop, he would fall asleep. So then between him and his captain, it was like elbow to the ribs. Okay, let's go forward another 5 feet and wait for another engine to fill, and then try not to doze off and do it again. So I know that was a big ask of you guys and a ton of work.
I want to say something here too. So what's funny is we kind of got a really good feel for the Avenue side of the fire, and we don't have anybody here who was in Ondolondo, Clearpoint, and spent their time there. And I know those guys had a very different experience because they took the fire front, which is kind of a bummer. Maybe we'll do another one. Talk to some of those guys, but just within our little city, two totally different experiences. And I mean, fortunately, we didn't lose half of the Avenue, but not the case on the other side. Chris, you got something to say? Go for it.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Peter, because it's like the one city, two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And Mark, you bring up another funny point that I don't even remember. I remember it now, but that firing operation, I completely forgot about that. But I remember like a couple hours later just going, yeah, we're gonna fire this whole thing.
Which is kind of ironic in a lot of ways, because we essentially burned the hillside that all of us who've worked for Ventura City for a long time have put out a lot of fires on that hillside from fireworks or whatever over the years. We fought so many fires on that hillside, and then we went and actually lit it ourselves and burned it.
To save some homes. Yeah, that's part of the tactics. And it, one of the good things about that side, actually both sides of the fire you guys are talking about, is there was a bunch of experienced brush guys that were able to do that. I know Chief Hill was running a bunch of the Ondolondo side, and I know McDonald was structure group, and those guys have a bunch of experience and classes and knowledge in that area.
Yeah, I was talking with some of those guys just last week and kind of trying to bring back a lot of these memories and stuff, and hearing, like, we more or less, I would say, Chris, like we're fairly feeling successful because we were able to protect and defend a lot of homes. But talking with guys who specifically worked in the Skyline area right next to Arroyo Verde Park and kind of the hillside middle of town, they started at the top. They worked all the way down, had basically stopped the fire from burning all these houses. And then they got to the bottom and they were like, great. They kind of worked from top to bottom. And as soon as they got to the bottom and they thought they had kind of a successful stop, it kind of flanked from the top and came down and started torching one house at a time. That thing really took a turn for them, which was not the case for us. We were pretty fortunate in that sense.
All right, I'm going to switch channels on you guys. And this kind of leads me, and our podcast a lot of times talks about effects of mental health on our guys and the families too. And one of the things personally that I felt was, Chief Miser touched on it before, but our city had to be protected from normal calls that we run every day. And the general public doesn't think about, we're still going to medical emergencies. We're still going to the smaller, dumpster fires and the day-to-day calls that we have. And I remember coming into work the next day and saying, send me to the big fire. I'm ready to go. I'm rested. Let me give these guys some relief. And I was told, stay at your station and run calls. And that was kind of a bummer to me because I wanted to give you guys some help. And I also wanted to kind of be a part of that. And that was, normal effect for the city. And the way initial attack is when you go to these big fires is the city fire department where the fire is has to go straight to that fire. And then the next operational period, usually the next day, when you get some support from other agencies, you go back to your station and you run normal fires. So not only was that tough on me, I want to hear what you guys' perspective is on some of the stuff that you dealt with. But then on top of that, when we're with these 36-hour plus shifts and you leave your family, Luke, especially when you leave from home, and then your family has no idea what's going on with you for extended periods of time, when you're in a known firefight or a known, to be cliche, a known war zone that you guys are in and what your family effects are. So Luke, you have something to hit on with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, like, we talk about the fire family, right? And I don't think you can really understand what that means unless you are a firefighter or a family member or something like that. But man, all of our wives and significant others, like, they are saints to put up with what is required of us. I mean, like the Thomas Fire, for example. So let's see, that was 2017. So I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at the time. So my wife, not only did I leave that night, then I worked for 6 days straight, dealt with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old all by herself with very little to no support from me. And my hat's off to all these women and all these significant others that can make that happen, because I know I couldn't do it. Like that, it is tough. So yeah, hats off to all them. But then back to what you were saying, Jason, like I came in that next morning and I'm like, man, put me in there, like I'm ready to go. And it was the same thing for me. It was like, no, you're going to run calls and you're going to wait for the next big fire to happen. I'm like, huh? Not what I was hoping to hear. I got involved a little bit more later on, but I had the same experience as you, where I was like, man, I was so bummed and like wanted to help my community. And here's the one chance that, we're going to have this giant fire, and I just want to help. And, we did help. We helped the people that, fell down and went boom and, had all the normal stuff.
Yeah, I came from that summer. I think it was maybe August. I was in Sonoma in Napa, and I went up there and did the same thing. So we're driving around the town before and after our shifts, and those guys from their fire stations were coming out to us, tell us what they dealt with the first day. And like I said earlier, we were thinking, man, this is crazy. There's no way this could happen down in Ventura. And the Sonoma fire that I was on was the largest fire in the history of California for exactly 4 months. And then the Thomas fire happened. And it's continuous and it's nonstop. And the Thomas fire led straight into the Montecito mudslides. So we're leaving our families for these huge known emergencies for literally weeks at a time, and just leaving them to deal with kids. People say firefighters are the bravest. What your wife went through sounds pretty brave to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of our wives.
Yeah, I want to jump in here and say the same thing, because unfortunately I don't have some heroic story like Luke has at the Thomas fire, because it's the same thing. I was at home, called, said, no, don't come in, came in the next day and ran medical calls all day. But I want to comment on a couple things. The Thomas fire arguably affected our department like beyond measure, right? But what I remember being back in the stations and running the calls while the Thomas fire was happening into maybe 2 or 3 months after the fire was out was how nervous, scared, on edge the general population of Ventura was. Like they would call for, if they saw a cigarette butt on the ground, they were calling 911 and frantic about it. And I think it just shook the fabric of Ventura for a long time. And it wasn't just the firefighters that were shook when it happened. I mean, it was the whole town, which was cool to see that the town, came together. I know from my own perspective, I didn't have a lot of action on the Thomas fire, but then was it a few weeks later that Montecito had? How long past the Thomas fire was Montecito?
I think it was 1 month.
1 month. Yeah. So I went to Montecito on the mudslides and was up there for a week or however long we were up there. And I just remember feeling like numb, because we had just come from the Thomas fire and all the stress of that, even though I wasn't physically on the fire itself, but it had a huge impact on everybody. And then right into that tragedy, and that stuff affects mental health that maybe you don't know it or feel it at the time, but that stuff impacts. And I just remember feeling numb, like, okay, I'm done with all this really bad stuff happening to so many people. But any thoughts or comments on that, on how that fire and the subsequent activities around it affected you guys?
Yeah, I would say, Peter, even to this day, there people who for sure live up in the hillside communities are still traumatized and are still, I wouldn't say trigger happy, but they're definitely proactive in wanting to mitigate any type of possibility of a remote possibility of any type of fire in and around Ventura, because it was really scary for them. And I would agree with you, Luke, that 100% the spouses and the families and stuff do not get enough credit in the fire service, because I know for myself, I went in that night not really kind of thinking a whole lot of the potential that could actually occur, and then really started to rev up, and then getting phone calls or text messages from my wife going, what should I do? What should I do? It's like our wives and family members are aware of the fire department. They probably learn terms and certain strategy more or less to a minimal amount compared to a normal professional firefighter. But my wife was scared, and she had 2 kids at home. Same thing like Luke. I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. My son was 4 and my daughter was 2. And she was kind of like, well, what do I do? Right. She looks up literally from our driveway. You can look up and see the hillside. And I live very close to Luke's parents where the fire got into the Barranca, which is only like a few hundred yards up from my house. And so I remember kind of getting involved with Chris and on the avenue and really having to get engaged, where I was to a point where I was like, I couldn't answer her phone calls or text messages in a more or less a prompt time to respond. It was just more or less when I could have a little downtime, I'd shoot her a text or give her a quick phone call and kind of like, hey, and she was trying to get updates from the neighbors and that kind of a thing. But it got to a point where I just told her, I said, hey, I can't be a part of what you're doing right now, but I will. I think it's to the point where I go, just leave the house, go to your sisters in Camarillo. Like, it's not worth staying. And this thing is getting pretty radical. And I just go, I can't worry about doing my job and keeping myself and my crew safe and worrying about what you guys are doing at home. And I would feel a lot better if you just left. And so she vividly remembers packing the kids up at night, waking them up out of their beds, loading them into the car, grabbing what stuffies or stuffed animals or whatever to kind of make them feel comfortable, because the kids are getting woken up in the middle of the night, more or less, and putting them in the car. And she describes closing that front door, going, I don't know if I'll ever come home to that. And that was a lot to hear that as a husband, going, man, like, I wasn't there to help you. I was trying to help others. And that does take its toll, I think, not just on us, but as the families. You know, they have PTSD too from these types of scenarios.
Great point, Mark. When the emergency is local and is our own, and we can't be a part of that because we're out helping the community, that's actually pretty common and more common than people would think. And we rely on our significant others, and a lot of times their role of having to be independent, whether they want to or not, is tough on families for sure.
Yeah. I'll take a second here to just give a plug to the foundation. So especially, while you guys are here, what we're starting to focus on, and it's not crystal clear exactly what the programming looks like for us, is we are going to try to make the families the focus of the foundation's charitable efforts, because in my opinion, the firefighters have each other when you're at the fire department. Now, when you retire, different story. And I'm sure Chris could speak to that, but during your career, you have each other. It's the spouses that are at home with the kids, the house, all the stuff that goes on. They're literally alone. And I think sometimes it's harder for them to connect with each other and get that it's not the same, right? Like, it's not like Mark's family can live with Luke's family for 6 days when you guys are gone on this fire. It's just not feasible. But what the foundation wants to do is target and focus on the families, because I think those are the true heroes in the whole world that we live in. But yeah, as much as you can help us get that word out to the guys, to the stations, I think that would be huge.
Anybody else have anything? Chris, you have anything you want to touch on?
Just to echo about what Luke and everybody and Mark's saying about our wives and our kids and the struggle that they go through when we're gone. It's funny, like the text messages, that alone kind of helps out. Like Darcy would text me and, hey, is everything okay? Whatever. Yeah, I'll get back to you when I can. My sister would frantically text me or call me. And I think Darcy she wouldn't sleep all night. And we lived out of town. We didn't live in Ventura. So it wasn't the experience that Mark and Luke and everybody else's families had, because our town wasn't burning down at the time, Almost did. What, a couple of years later, Jason?
Yeah, you're the firefighter, right? You're the community guy who all the neighbors go to and say, yeah, what do I do when this happens? And when your family needs you, you're tugged in so many directions when there's a big event going on that you have to support your community with. And, your family's calling you, needing you too. And man, that's tough for sure.
I have one more thing. I heard he might be in Mama. Mama.
He might be in Mama.
Was the brew with you guys that night on the avenue?
The Dunes?
No.
Well, shout out to the brew.
Shout out to the brew, yeah. Chris and I always had this funny saying. We would talk about Donna and Mammoth and Pot. We all love Chad. He's got these funny sayings. And Chris, man, I miss that, man.
Yeah, I will say, it's weird, and Pete can probably speak to this as well, is leaving the fire department very young. I mean, no one does it. Pete and I did it, which is kind of bizarre considering it's from the same fire department. But not a lot of guys leave early, and I had gotten into a car accident like 2018 or 19, I forget when, 19. And that kind of just prompted me to move me into I didn't end up coming back to the fire department, but it's been weird because of that transition from firefighter, and I had retired as a captain, so like you're like everything's like very kind of like regimented. If this happens, you kind of do this, and then you transition to life outside of that. It's been really bizarre for me, and Jason and I talk quite a bit about it, but it's been like it's just to talk to you guys again and hear these stories and hear about Pat and Dano and Mammoth, and like I don't have that anymore, really. Like I don't get to walk in the morning and have coffee and just cry laughing. It's like I miss that. I think any retired guy misses that, like where you're just sitting around the table just crying laughing. I mean, even on the Thomas fire, I remember Hermes slipped down a little hill and had mud all over him, and Logan and I were so delirious. Like after 16 hours, we were sitting there like in the cab, just like crying, laughing. We're like, whoa, Hermes fell in some mud and now he's down the street trying to get a sandwich. And like, we were just crying, laughing. And like, I miss that. I mean, as disastrous as some of that stuff becomes, the fires and stuff and some of the bad stuff you see, it's like, it truly is that fire family, the bond that you really can't get. I mean, other than probably the military, I would imagine. But that brotherhood, that like bond you get on some of these calls and like the closeness that like, I mean, I don't know, I'm droning on, but I don't know if you feel the same way, Pete. You're more involved with the foundation, so you have a little bit more connection, but it's tough.
I'll second everything you're saying for sure. So I obviously left when I was younger as well, just like you. I didn't realize how tough retiring, or I don't know what you want to call what we did, whatever you want to name it. I didn't expect it to be hard. I thought it was going to be, we're shedding all the bad things about the fire service and we're moving on to this next thing. Well, there's a ton of good stuff about the fire service that I didn't account for when I made that decision. And it's not that I didn't know there was those things. It was just, it didn't factor in the same way as all the other competing interests in my life were factoring in. But I don't have regrets for leaving by any means, but there's more to it than just retiring and hanging up your turncoats and clearing out your locker and moving on. It's way more complex than that. And I think that's an area that the fire service honestly fails at. Like we fail the guys that retire because we don't have a plan to retire someone when we absolutely should. We should have training and support built around retiring. And I think that's an area that maybe the foundation could explore too. But Chris, I'd love to get you back on the podcast and kind of beat that issue up a bit, because we're not the only people that felt that. Every retired guy quick story. After I left, anytime I'd run into a retired guy, I go, hey, was it hard to retire? And every single one of them would be like, oh man, it was so hard. This was hard. And I'm like, could you have like shared that with people that were like getting ready to retire? Because everyone's having the same experience, yet nobody was talking about it. And it was just kind of mind boggling to me that this stuff isn't more out in the open, and it's all the same stuff. It's loss of camaraderie, structure. Your life is incredibly structured. I mean, look at Luke. He's in a fire department uniform. He doesn't have to think about what he puts on when he comes to work. He doesn't have to think about what he puts on no matter what call comes in. It's all structured, laid out. All that stuff goes away when you retire, and you're like dropped into this alternate universe almost, even though you have days off. And that's not, I don't want to make it sound crazy or weird, but yeah, the sleep is nice, but it's a totally different topic. And I think we need to focus on that a little bit, especially with the podcast, and see if we can't help guys that are getting ready to retire and or help the retired guys. Cause there's a fair amount of retired guys that need help, that struggle with it.
I think along those points too, Pete, is that, I can't guarantee this or whatever, but I've had multiple guys reach out to me. And I think with the stuff that the modern fire department is going through, with the amount of calls, the amount of stress that's put it onto our guys, whether it's seeing bad calls or dead people or structure fires and loss and disasters, and it's the little calls, it's the constant lack of sleep, it's all those things that I think that you're going to see more of young retirements moving forward. I really do, because I think people are going to find other options and they're going to go, you know what? I love the fire department. I love the guys, but I need to be around for my family, and I need a break from that.
Yeah.
And
Chris,
and I think you're going to see that a lot.
Get more involved with the foundation. That's the way to stay tied in. The foundation is all volunteer. Well, I shouldn't say that, because we do have an executive director now, which has been a blessing for the foundation, but the rest of it is volunteer, and we could always use more help, and it's a good way to stay connected. And there's a lot of, I look at the foundation as like supporting all the good things in the fire service and taking the areas that we need help on and focusing on them. Whereas the fire department itself, they're not really designed to do that. Like, they have a mission that's critical, which is to, protect lives and save property. And that's kind of where they're geared. Where the foundation is different. We're there to support the guys, and more importantly, the families of the guys. So we definitely could use all the help we can get, especially retired people who know exactly what the struggles are and lived it, breathed it, and now can turn around and give a little back to it. So not a sales pitch for the foundation, but kind of.
Yeah, as we wrap this thing up, I want to say it's good to see you, Plessner. We need to see more of your face around, man. I miss you. It must be nice to be able to grow a beard nowadays, although nobody's as luxurious as yours. Yeah, I believe you.
I started yesterday. I remember when Preston and I were, Luke's mustache is insane. But when Preston and I were on probation, we were at Station 3 at shift change, and we both have fairly thick, fast-growing beards. And Tom Hoffman was like, "Hey man, what's that sound? Is that Rice Krispies popping? Did someone just pour milk on Rice Krispies?" Said, "Oh no, it's the guy's facial hair growing." Something like that. It was pretty funny. Yeah, I'm in Wisconsin right now. So right after this podcast, my family and I are heading back to California for a few months. So love to get together with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate you spending the time, and maybe, you never know, we might be back on another podcast doing something similar. But thanks for your stories. Thanks for everything you did surrounding the Thomas Fire, and the support of the foundation as well.
Wow, what a bunch of stories we just heard from a bunch of perspectives and a great bunch of guys who were on the front lines at the Thomas Fire, really working hard and going for it for probably close to 36 hours. Sounds like the standard shift, that first operational period.
It brought back memories, even though you and I weren't on the front line. We were back at the stations during the fire, but some of those stories and things you forgot, because there were no stories that I hadn't heard before. They were just stories we hadn't talked about for 5 years. But I thought what was interesting is, all the technical talk about the fire was interesting, but I kind of liked the last half of the podcast when we got into the effects on the guys' mental health, the families of the people who are at home. Like, there's an impact there that kind of is not something that's really spoken of very much. Everybody wants to know about the fire and how, the houses that were burned and what we saved and all this stuff. And I think sometimes in the shadows is the family, is the trauma on the guys' mental health themselves. There's a lot of issues there. And I thought it was awesome that we were openly talking about that stuff.
And I'm starting to see a pattern with our podcast. We have people on to tell about their story, usually their heroic type of story that they tell, and they tell the tactics and the strategies. And then towards the end, we lead them into some kind of mental health aspect that we're supporting with our foundation, and they immediately want to talk about it, and they talk about how it affects them to this day and how it affects their families. And I can really see that how important that is to them too.
Yeah, just hearing Chris talk about that stuff towards the end there, how he misses this. Like, there was 4 or 5 guys on this podcast at the same time. There's a little bit of banter, a little bit of poking fun at each other. And he says, this is what I miss. Because that's the stuff that goes away when you retire and you walk out the doors of those fire stations for the last time, which is crazy that stuff, it's therapeutic for a lot of guys. And when they leave and that stuff goes, that causes a lot of issues. But I'm looking forward to getting Chris back on the podcast and to kind of drill down on those topics. So hopefully he's open to that.
Yeah, sounds like a topic for another show. Looking forward to it. Well, great podcast.
Yeah.
Really good to talk to these guys, and thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, quick plug for the podcast. If you guys are listening to this and you like it, please leave a review, share it. We're trying to get the word out. We want to bring as much light to the work that the foundation's doing as we can, and this is a great way to help us out. So thanks, everybody, and until the next time.
Take care.